Thank you, John Whitaker, for sending me such a meaningful story through email. Tonight, Dust and Destiny brings it to life, just as you wrote it. A tale of honor, injustice, and the kind of courage that makes legends out of ordinary men. They were about to sell a child on the back of a splintered wagon, and they believed no one would dare say no. That is, until an Apache rider stepped out of the shadows. The town of Grayson was built out of dust and stubbornness, clinging to the edge of the frontier like a nail hammered into rotten wood. It was early winter when this story began, the kind of day when the cold didn't bite but scraped, dry winds sweeping down from the hills, stinging faces and coating lips with grit. The sky was gray, heavy with clouds that never quite brought snow, only the promise of it. In the town square, the people gathered, boots stomping against packed dirt, spurs jangling against weathered boardwalks. A wagon had been dragged into the center, its planks cracked and bowed, the smell of mule sweat still clinging to its frame. On top of it stood the sheriff, chin high, coat collar turned against the wind. He had the look of a man who liked order most when he could twist it into spectacle. And at his side, though he did not belong there, stood a boy. He couldn't have been more than 9, maybe 10. Thin as a rail, cheeks hollow, ribs pressing against a torn shirt that had seen better days. His name, they said, was Eli, and in his arms, cradled against his bony chest, was a bundle wrapped in a grain sack. From it peeked the tiny face of an infant, skin pale from hunger and cold. Her name was Nora, though the crowd didn't bother to learn it. They only saw her as baggage, something that came with the boy like a ragged saddle comes with a horse. The sheriff declared Eli a thief. He'd been caught the night before stealing from a widow's pantry, half a loaf of bread, a slice of salted pork, and an onion. The town council ruled that orphans were old enough to be punished like men and too young to hang without causing trouble. So instead of justice, they called it an auction. $1 starts the debt, the sheriff barked, holding his hand over the boy's thin shoulder. $1 buys him to your service. Feed him, work him, keep him till his debt is paid. The girl comes with him. The crowd stirred like buzzards circling. Men smirked. Women whispered. Someone spat. And then the bidding began. $2, called a merchant, laughing. He can carry sacks of beans. $3, another shouted. He'll muck stalls fine as any mule. The numbers rose, and with each call, Eli clutched the baby tighter, his knees shaking, but his face locked in stubborn silence. Nora stirred weakly, her small arm falling limp from the sack, fingers blue at the tips. That was when a new voice cut through the noise. 10. The word rolled across the square like a rifle shot. The crowd froze. Heads turned. The sheriff squinted into the distance. At the edge of the square sat a rider on a pale buckskin horse. Dust clung to his coat. A wide-brimmed hat shaded his face. He carried a Winchester strapped to his saddle, but his hands never touched it. His name, whispered in the crowd, was Nantan Gray. He was Chiricahua Apache, broad-shouldered, streaks of gray running through his black hair, lines of hard years carved deep around his eyes. Once he had scouted for the army, guiding soldiers through canyons and deserts. But that was long ago. Now he kept to his land at Red Mesa, south of town, where the hills bled red at sunset, and the wind told stories no white man cared to hear. $10, Nantan said again, his voice steady, carrying without effort. The sheriff scowled. Name? Nantan Gray. He swung down from his horse, his boots sinking into the dirt with heavy steps. His eyes never left Eli, not once. The deputy, Cord Alton, shifted at the sheriff's side. Cord was young, ambitious, and mean in that quiet way that lingers. He'd had his eye on the boy, cheap labor for his father's barn, maybe worse. Losing to an Apache ate at him like rot. 10's the high bid, the sheriff announced reluctantly, unless someone wants 11. The crowd muttered, but no one spoke. Sold, Nantan said before the gavel could fall. His voice left no room for argument. Cord's lip curled. You don't want him. He's a thief. The girl's sick. They'll drag you down. Nantan stepped forward. He reached up, unlocked the boy's iron cuffs himself. The metal clattered to the wagon bed. Eli flinched, But he didn't run. He only stared at this stranger, bewildered, unsure whether to trust him. Nantan looked at Nora then, pulling the ragged sack aside just enough to see her cracked lips, her too still chest rising shallow against the cold. He took his own wool blanket from his shoulder and wrapped it around the baby without a word. Finally, he looked at the crowd, at the sheriff, the deputy, the merchants and farmers who had all come to watch a child sold like a mule. His voice was low, but it carried in the silence. It's been a long time since any of you stood up for someone who couldn't stand for themselves. He took Eli's small hand in his own calloused grip, lifted Nora into the crook of his arm, and turned away from the wagon. The crowd parted, some muttering, some glaring, but none stepping forward to stop him. As he mounted his horse, Eli clinging tight behind him, the square seemed smaller, meaner, emptier. And I'll ask you, the listener, the same question that still hangs in the cold air of that day. If you had been standing in that square, would you have raised your hand to save the child? Or turned away, telling yourself it was only the law of the town? The ride from Grayson to Red Mesa stretched longer than miles could measure. The trail wound through low pine and scrub oak, branches scratching against the gray sky. The land rolled out bleak and quiet, the kind of silence that made a man hear the rhythm of his own heartbeat. Nantan Gray rode steady, shoulders set against the cold. He said little, but every motion carried its own kind of care. At one point, he slipped his canteen back to Eli without a word. The boy gulped water, spilling half of it down his shirt, then hugged the baby tighter, afraid she might stir and cry. When the wind picked up, Nantan untied a thick wool blanket from his saddle, draped it across both children, and held the reins in one hand all the way home. By the time the buckskin mare crested the last ridge, dusk had already swallowed the horizon. Below lay Red Mesa Ranch, not much more than a cabin of rough-hewn pine, a small barn leaning against the wind, and a corral half buried in red earth. Smoke curled from a stone chimney, faint but steady. For Eli, who had known only alleyways and hand-me-down scraps of shelter, it looked like a palace. Inside, warmth struck like a hammer. The crackle of a fire filled the single room, its light playing against shelves lined with tools and a table scarred from years of meals. Nantan laid Nora gently in a wooden cradle pulled close to the hearth. The cradle creaked but held, and for the first time that day, the baby breathed without shivering. Eli stood frozen, too wary to sit, too hungry to speak. His eyes darted to the pot bubbling on the fire, the loaf of bread wrapped in cloth on the table. Nantan ladled stew into a tin bowl and slid it across. "Eat," he said simply. The boy obeyed, spoon trembling in his hand, but he did not take his eyes off the cradle where his sister lay. Only when she stirred softly did his shoulders loosen, just enough for the taste of broth and potato to register. That night, while Eli hovered by Nora's side, Nantan saddled up again and rode back down the ridge. He returned with Dr. Harlan, an old man with a beard yellowed by tobacco and hands that shook until they touched a patient. He bent over the baby, listening to the shallow rattle in her lungs. "She's weak," Harlan muttered, "but not gone. Keep her warm. A drop of this every hour." He pulled 2 small bottles from his bag and placed them on the table. "If she makes it through the night, she might pull through." Nantan nodded. He didn't haggle, didn't ask for mercy on the fee. He paid in coin and venison jerky, then led the doctor back to his mule. When the door closed, silence returned, broken only by the fire and the faint whistle of the wind outside. Nantan sat heavy in his chair, staring at the flames. The sight of that child's labored breath had shaken something he had long buried. Years ago, before the ranch, before he gave up scouting, Nantan had buried his own daughter on the edge of the desert. Whooping cough, the doctor said, as if a name could soften the ache of losing a child who had barely learned to laugh. He had sworn then never to open his heart again. The land was cruel enough, why give it more to steal? But when Nora's tiny fingers curled around the edge of his blanket, that oath cracked. Days passed into weeks, and life settled into a rhythm unfamiliar but steady. Eli fetched water from the pump and learned to split kindling without losing fingers. He stumbled through the faded Bible Nantan kept on a shelf, sounding out words by firelight. And at night, when the shadows stretched long, Nantan told him the old stories, tales the Chiricahua passed down around campfires long before forts and railroads. He spoke of the path of the protector, a story of a warrior who stood between the people and the darkness, not for reward, but because someone had to. Eli listened wide-eyed, the words shaping something new in his chest, a sense that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't alone anymore. Nora gained strength little by little. Her cough lingered but no longer clawed at her chest. When she smiled for the first time, thin, fleeting but real, it lit the cabin brighter than the fire itself. To honor her survival, Nantan built her a proper cradle from mesquite wood. He carved twin stars along the headboard and a two-headed crow, a symbol from Apache tradition for resilience and watchfulness. His rough hands sanded the wood smooth until it gleamed, then placed it by the fire where she could sleep without fear. But peace on the frontier was never without shadow. Cord Alton rode up the trail one cold afternoon, dust and spite clinging to his boots. He dismounted slow, leaning on the railing of the porch like he owned it. "So this is where you keep 'em," he sneered. "Town's been talking. An Apache raising white children. Don't sound right. Don't sound legal." Nantan didn't rise from his chair. He didn't reach for his rifle. He only met Cord's eyes, calm as stone. "They're safe here," he said. Cord spat into the dirt. "Safe ain't lawful. Council might decide those kids belong somewhere else, somewhere proper." Eli stood just inside the doorway, Nora bundled in his arms. His jaw trembled, but his feet didn't move. Nantan finally stood, slow and deliberate. He stepped between Cord and the door. "If the council wants them, they'll ride up here themselves." Cord's smile was thin as a knife. "You'll regret it, Apache. You think law bends for you?" Nantan didn't blink. "Law bends for whoever is willing to hold the line." Cord left with a curse, but the air he stirred didn't settle. His words carried weight. So Nantan made his choice. He rode into town not to bargain, but to bind. He met with Pastor Ward at the church, a man old enough to know when faith meant action. Nantan laid out his intent plain. He would become guardian of Eli and Nora. Ward filled the forms, signed his name as witness, and sealed it with the church's authority. But Nantan did not stop there. He also brought with him a letter from a Chiricahua elder who had long worked with county courts. The elder testified that Eli and Nora were under Nantan's protection by the right of Apache custom, where the clan of a protector had equal claim to blood. One document was American law, the other was Apache law. Together, they formed a shield. And here's the truth worth remembering. The letter of the law can shift like sand. Papers can be forged, signatures can be twisted, but the strength of a man's heart, the willingness to stand in front of children with nothing but his own body, that is the only contract that lasts. It was true then, and it's true now. Think of foster families today, neighbors who take in children with no blood tie, strangers who open doors because no one else would. Some call it charity, some call it duty. But whatever name you give it, it is the fence that keeps the wolves out when the law is too slow to matter. That was what Nantan Gray understood, long before Grayson did. Grayson had always been a town split down the middle, half desperate for order, half addicted to spectacle. After Nantan Gray carried Eli and little Nora away from the auction block, those cracks widened. Some folks muttered that the Apache had no business raising white children. Others, quiet but firm, whispered that maybe justice had finally worn a human face. Cord Alton did not forgive. Losing the boy on the wagon still burned like whiskey in his throat. He took to backroom deals and muttered threats, and before long 3 riders appeared at the edge of Red Mesa. They weren't townsfolk. They weren't lawmen. They were bounty hunters. Men who never asked for paperwork, only coin. That first night they circled the ranch slow, testing. Their silhouettes loomed against the ridge as the snow began to fall, 3 shadows moving like wolves at the edge of the firelight. Eli crouched near the hearth, clutching Nora, his young face pale with fear. Nantan stood from his chair without a word. He took down the Winchester from above the mantel, stepped out onto the porch, and leveled a single shot into the beam of the barn. The crack of rifle fire echoed through the canyon and splinters rained down. The riders cursed and pulled back, their horses restless under them. Inside, Nantan barred the doors, set a heavy beam across the shutters, and then sat with Eli at the table. He spoke calm, like a man teaching chores. Breathe slow. When you aim, don't yank. Squeeze. Count your heartbeat. 1, 2, 3. His rough hands wrapped gently around the boy's small ones, showing him how to hold the rifle steady. It wasn't a lesson in violence, it was a lesson in survival. The riders did not return that night, but the message was clear. Trouble was only beginning. Days later, the trouble wore a seal. A letter arrived from the county council, stamped and folded neat. The children, Eli and Nora, are hereby declared wards of the county. Surrender them at once or face legal action. Nantan rode into town himself, coat heavy with snow, boots echoing in the courthouse hall. 5 men sat behind a long table, faces tight with self-importance. Cord Alton leaned against the back wall, arms crossed, smirking like a gambler sure of his hand. "Do you claim guardianship?" one councilman asked. Nantan placed 2 documents on the table. The first was the church record, signed by Pastor Ward, declaring him guardian by Christian witness. The second was a parchment signed by a Chiricahua elder, affirming the children were under Nantan's protection by Apache law. "Both law and custom," Nantan said. His voice was steady, neither raised nor softened. The council shuffled papers, muttered about precedents. Cord snorted. "You can't be serious. An Apache raising white children?" Silence followed. Then Pastor Ward, sitting in the back pew, spoke. "Serious enough. I signed it, and I'll stand by it." The room chilled. The councilman at the center finally waved a hand. "For now, the matter stands. Guardianship recognized." Cord spat. His eyes promised the fight wasn't over. It wasn't. The storm came 3 nights later. Snow slammed the roof and rattled the shutters. The wind howled like a wounded coyote, filling the canyon with its cry. That was when they came again. More riders this time, at least half a dozen. Shapes moved in the dark, lanterns swaying, hooves muffled by the snow. Inside, Nantan loaded the rifle with calm precision. He turned to Eli. The boy held Nora tight, his jaw trembling. "You keep her in the cellar," Nantan said, nodding to the trap door beneath the kitchen rug. "You hold the lamp. Keep her warm. You don't open that hatch unless you hear my voice. Understand?" Eli hesitated. His eyes searched the man's face. "What about you?" Nantan's answer was simple. "I hold the door." Eli lowered himself into the root cellar. Nora bundled in quilts. The hatch shut, muffling their cries. Above, Nantan stepped out onto the porch, snow stinging his cheeks. Winchester braced. "Leave," he called into the storm. Gunfire answered. Splinters leapt from the doorframe. Nantan fired back, shots deliberate, measured, scattering the front line. Horses screamed, men cursed. The storm turned the fight into chaos, smoke and snow swirling together. Then came betrayal. A 4th rider had slipped around the back, prying through the storm door. The crack of a revolver inside the cabin was deafening. Nantan staggered, a bullet tearing through his shoulder. He fell against the hearth, blood soaking his coat. Below, Eli heard the shot. His small hands shook as he pushed open the hatch. Nora whimpered, and the boy whispered, "Stay here," though she could not understand. He climbed into the smoke-filled room, grabbed the rifle Nantan had left, and aimed at the figure looming over the Apache. He squeezed the trigger. The recoil knocked him back, but the intruder fell, dead before he hit the floor. "Eli!" Nantan groaned, struggling to rise. "I've got you!" the boy said, voice breaking. He pulled with all his strength, dragging the wounded man toward the door as flames licked across the rug. The fire spread quick, fed by lamp oil, turning the cabin into a furnace. With one last heave, Eli hauled Nantan through the threshold into the snow. He returned for Nora, clutching her tight against his chest. Behind them, the roof collapsed in a roar of sparks. Red Mesa cabin was gone, swallowed by fire. Dawn was hours away. The wind cut like knives. Eli tied Nora close against his chest with the quilt, then heaved Nantan across the back of the mule. Blood dripped into the snow. The boy's legs buckled, but he pressed forward. 4 miles through storm and dark, one step at a time. By the time they stumbled into Grayson Square, Eli's lips were blue, his arms numb. He shouted for help, his voice raw. For a moment, no one stirred. Then doors cracked open, lanterns lit, faces appeared at windows. Pastor Ward was the first to step outside. When he saw the blood and the child, he didn't ask questions. He rang the bell for Dr. Harlan. The old physician worked for hours, hands steady despite his age. Eli refused to leave the room. He held Nora in the corner, whispering to her as if his words alone might keep her alive. Outside, the town gathered in silence. Whispers swirled. Guilt, shame, admiration. By noon, the sheriff himself entered, Cord Alton swaggering behind him. Cord pointed at Eli. "You'll answer for what you did. You killed a man." The boy rose, clutching his sister tighter. "He was protecting us, and I'd do it again." Pastor Ward stepped between them. "Enough. You want a trial? You get a judge, but don't spit on truth while it's still bleeding." The room turned when Nantan's voice came, weak but firm. He stood at the doorway, pale, shoulder-bound but unbroken. "He is my son," Nantan said. "She is my daughter. You want them? You'll come through me again." Silence fell heavy. Hats came off. The sheriff's face shifted from doubt to something closer to respect. He pulled a paper from his coat, signed it with a hard stroke, and placed it on the table. Guardianship recognized, legal, binding. Cord's sneer withered. Without the crowd at his back, he was nothing but a bitter man with empty hands. He stepped away, muttering curses that no longer carried weight. In that moment, the town of Grayson saw itself. They saw a child who had carried a man through snow and fire, an Apache who had stood against the law not to defy it, but to fulfill it. And for once, the square was silent, not with cruelty but with shame, and something more dangerous to men like Cord: respect. That day, in a courthouse too small for the weight it held, Nantan Gray spoke the words that bound them together. "The boy is mine. The girl is mine." And no one, sheriff, council, or crowd, dared to argue. The fire at Red Mesa burned itself out by dawn, leaving nothing but black timbers and a chimney that pointed skyward like an accusation. For days, the smell of smoke clung to the hills, a reminder of what hatred had tried to erase. But frontier towns had long memories, and not all of them were cruel. Something shifted in Grayson after that night. They had seen a child drag a wounded man through a snowstorm, and they had seen an Apache stand taller than any law written on paper. Shame has a way of making people want to build, not destroy. So they came. Men with wagons full of lumber, women with baskets of nails, children carrying hammers too big for their hands. Apache families from nearby camps rode in, bringing bundles of cedar poles. Mexican vaqueros from the ranches south of the river offered strong backs and steady songs to keep rhythm while walls rose. Side by side, folks who rarely spoke to one another now worked under the same cold sun, boards creaking into place, roofs hammered against the wind. What rose on that ridge was more than a cabin. It was a home. They called it Red Mesa Home. On the main beam above the doorway, Nantan carved 2 symbols: the shield of his Apache people, round and bold, and beside it, a small wooden cross. 2 heritages, 2 ways of seeing the world, set together without crowding each other out. When the sun hit the wood in late afternoon, the cross and the shield cast overlapping shadows across the threshold. Anyone who stepped inside carried both with them. Life found its rhythm again, different this time, bigger. Eli, still slight but growing taller by the month, took on the role of teacher to the other strays who began arriving. Orphans drifted in from Grayson, from ranches beyond, sometimes sent quietly by families who couldn't feed another mouth but wanted to see a child safe. Eli taught them the lessons Nantan had first given him: how to split logs without losing fingers, how to aim at a tin can and breathe steady, how to read the scratch of ink on a contract so no one could cheat them. Nora grew as the heart of the home. She was sharp-eyed, quicker with numbers than most grown men. By the time she was 10, she was balancing ledgers, keeping track of supplies, and calling out any rancher who tried to underpay. "No," she'd say firmly, voice clear as a bell. "That's not the deal we agreed on." More than once, her words alone ended an argument before it ever reached the edge of a pistol. Around the fire at night, Nantan passed on something deeper. From a leather pouch worn smooth by years, he drew out a charm carved from fishbone, polished thin as ivory. He laid it in Eli's palm. "This is Intil," he said quietly. "My father carried it during the rains when storms came fast and men didn't come back. It means you stand between danger and the child behind you. That is the weight. That is the duty." Eli closed his fist around the charm, feeling its cool edges press into his skin. He understood. What they were building at Red Mesa wasn't just shelter. It was a promise, one that children who arrived broken would leave stronger. And here's where the story ties to our own time. Think about the foster families we know today, the church groups, the veterans who run summer ranch camps, teaching kids who have nothing how to ride, how to shoot straight, how to trust their own hands. None of them can erase the past for those children, but they can stand, just as Nantan did, between danger and the weak. The paperwork may differ, the courts may argue, but the pattern is the same. One open door can mean the difference between ruin and survival. The people of Grayson didn't put it in so many words. They just saw that a burned cabin had become a hall of laughter and work, a place where no child felt the weight of iron shackles again. So I'll leave you with this question, just as that winter left it hanging over the ridge. Today, when you see injustice wrapped up in the excuse of procedure, will you sign another paper and look away? Or will you open your door and make room inside? When the smoke finally cleared from those hard winters, the story of Red Mesa was no longer just about a burned cabin or a courtroom argument. It had become a lesson, one worth carrying even now. The first lesson is simple but sharp. Justice is not the shout of a crowd. It isn't the roar of men bidding over a child like livestock. Justice is the lone figure willing to stand in front of the weak when every other back has turned. That was what Nantan Gray did the day he raised his hand and said 10. The second lesson belongs to the frontier itself. The honor of a man on the borderlands is measured by his promises. Not promises to the powerful, not to the council, but to the smallest hands reaching up in the dark. Out there, when doors splintered and bullets tore through the night, a man was known by whether he kept faith with the child hiding behind him. And the third lesson is perhaps the hardest. Law matters, but the heart decides. Paper stamped and signed may carry weight, but it always moves slower than a child's hunger or a fever's bite. The law can recognize a family. Only a man's hand stretched out in the moment can make one. That is what endured at Red Mesa. Picture it now, the sun dropping low across the canyon, painting the ridge in colors of rust and gold. Nora, no longer frail but laughing on the porch steps, her eyes bright, her voice certain. Eli, taller now, strong from years of work, places an old silver badge into a wooden chest. Beside it rests the Apache bone charm, the Intil, smooth from the touch of generations. Two symbols, two legacies, one from a fallen lawman, the other from a tribal father, lying side by side in peace. No argument, no struggle, just balance. And from that balance comes a truth older than the town of Grayson, older even than the dust that blows across Red Mesa. In the Redlands of the West, the worth of a man is measured by the weakest soul he dares to protect. That was Nantan's creed, and by living it he carved out a place where orphans found names, where the broken learned to stand, and where the law finally bent toward mercy. So we close this story not with gunfire or spectacle, but with quiet. Quiet that holds weight. And I'll leave you with thanks. Thank you, John Whitaker, for the email that opened the door to this piece of the past. And to all listening, if this story of Red Mesa reached you, if it stirred even a memory of your own, then I ask you to walk with us a little further. Follow Dust and Destiny. Share this story with someone who still believes honor matters. Click like if you felt the fire in it. And write your thoughts below. In your eyes, does justice begin with the letter of the law, or with the heart of a man who refuses to turn away? And if you carry a story of your own, something your grandfather told you, something buried in a family letter, something that belongs to the dust of the old frontier, send it to our email. we'll listen, and we'll tell it again, as the West has always done, passing the flame from one voice to another, because the frontier is not gone. It lives in the choices we make and in the way we keep faith with those who have no one else.